Going back on the record, the time on the video screen is 13:32 and 57 seconds. Please continue.
Before we start, I need to go on the record with one question about whether I had provided deposition in the past. I answered that question saying in a business matter, but I forgot. I provided, I was deposed by the Justice Department on a court claim which had to do with my family's pictures that FBI had confiscated and lost. And for that particular case, they deposed me for like 2 or 3 hours. So I just want to go on the record and correct that.
All right, I guess we're beginning the afternoon session. Ms. Edmonds, my name is Mr. Fine, and I'm an attorney who represents Jane Schmidt in her complaint against Mr. Krikorian here before the Ohio Elections Commission. When did you first learn of the complaint that Ms. Schmidt had filed against Mr. Krikorian?
About maybe 10 days, 2 weeks ago. 10 days
and
ago.
How did you learn of that?
I either received an email or call from Mr. Krikorian's office, and I was told that there was this lawsuit that I may be called as a witness.
And who spoke to you?
I spoke with Mr. Krikorian.
And what did he ask you to do?
He asked whether I would be available to be deposed if he and his attorneys for the trial they were going to have would want to seek my deposition.
Mm-hmm. And what did you respond?
I don't recall exactly, but I said, well, if I get a subpoena or just let me know what it is, then I will speak with my attorneys.
Did Mr. Krikorian explain to you what the complaint was about?
No, he told me there is public information available, and just in general he said that there was a complaint brought against him with the Ohio State Election Commission, and I just went and briefly read a couple of articles that were out there on the case, that the fact that this case existed to verify it.
Did you actually read the complaint that had been filed before the Ohio Elections Commission?
Do you mean the actual legal complaint?
Yes.
No.
Have you read it at present? When you came here today, had you read the actual legal complaint?
No.
So you don't know what's actually in the complaint, is that correct?
Just some major points that have been public on websites and
so you received, Mr. Krikorian called you about 10 days ago, and your response was that you would be willing to be deposed, or what exactly did you tell him?
Objection
I apologize if you
answered.
All right. Well, guys, what is it? Did you? I want a clarification. When he asked you, would you be deposed? Did you say yes?
Asked and answered.
Did anyone inform you before you appeared today that the Ohio Elections Commission had stated it would not enforce the subpoena that had been issued for you to be deposed here?
I read the letter.
So that you knew you didn't have to appear here?
Correct.
Objection calls for legal conclusion.
No, I'm sorry. I would like her opinion here. She's testified about state secrets privilege. She's testified about what genocide means. Those are all legal questions. She can testify about her subpoena.
Excuse me, I'm joining the objection.
Okay, go ahead and answer.
What is the question?
The question is, did you read and understand that the Ohio Elections Commission had stated that they did not intend to enforce the subpoena? What? I said, were you under that understanding that the Ohio Elections Commission, in the letter, had stated to all the attorneys involved in the Department of Justice they did not intend to enforce the subpoena that had been issued for you to be deposed here today?
That's not quite my understanding of the letter.
I think it speaks for
I
itself.
read the letter.
Mm-hmm. So, in your view, are you here voluntarily?
Objection calls for legal
I know.
conclusion.
Are you here voluntarily? I answer the question. In your view, are you here voluntarily? Did,
She
any,
is here
did anyone
under-
did anyone advise you that you were compelled to be here and you would be in contempt of an outstanding decree issued by a government agency if you were not here?
Excuse me, may I just make an objection?
Sure.
Object based on legal, calls for legal conclusion, and now you're asking for attorney-client
No.
communications.
I agree.
That's not. Go ahead. You-
The witness is not going to answer that question because it's outside the scope of her appearance.
Who did you discuss what you would be saying here today to anyone before you arrived here at 10:30 or so?
Can you be more specific?
Yes. Did you talk to somebody about what you would testify to in today's deposition to anybody else? I'm not talking about the substance, just that you did, and identify the people who you spoke about.
I have responded to requests about comments about today, as I don't know. There are going to be questions, and I don't know what questions I'm going to be asked. And after it is over, and before with my attorneys, will be present to make comments.
Did you talk to Mr. Kokorian about what you would be saying today?
To
Mr.
during
Kokorian.
this, you mean what I'm going to say during deposition here?
Yes.
During
Mhm.
this, no.
Did you talk to anybody else about what you would be saying here today? I'm not talking about the substance, just a person that you can identify you spoke to about what you would be saying and what questions you might be confronting.
I
Can you
have.
just make an objection. I assume you're not referring to her own counsel. I'd ask her whether she talked to her.
No, I don't want attorney-client privilege.
I did not know what questions I was going to be asked, so I couldn't talk about my answers.
Let's go back to your hiring by the FBI. I think your testimony is September 15th, 2001.
Around that.
Okay. Now, were you employed prior to your hiring by the FBI?
Yes.
And where were you employed?
Had my own company with my husband.
And what was that company involved in? What business was it?
Technology for retail industry.
And when was that company formed?
About 1996.
1996. Been about 5 years old company. Where was it? Do you know where it was registered?
I believe Alexandria, Virginia.
And so what were your tasks at that company?
Marketing
Marketing.
and day-to-day management of people.
Could you be a little more specific? You're saying it's a retail marketing company. Do you offer your services to retailers? Do you actually sell retail items?
Do you have a relevant question?
Yes, I do have a relevance. Her background, knowing before we went into the FBI exactly what her background in intelligence was.
We object it's outside the scope of the direct examination.
The position I had involved providing inventory and supply chain management related software and services, IT services for retail chains.
All right. And were there any employees of the company or just you and your husband?
Now, at that time, I believe we had 7 or 8 employees.
So is it fair to say the company was involved in providing some kind of software that would enable retailers to do inventory control?
IT services.
IT
yes.
service. Did it have anything at all to do with intelligence collection?
No.
Did it have anything at all to do with lobbying Congress or campaign finance?
No.
How old were you when you were hired by the FBI?
31.
31 years old. And prior to that time, did you consider yourself an intelligence expert? Did you do, just as an avocation, a lot of reading in intelligence collection and counterintelligence and espionage and how covert operations were run?
Objection, compound.
Both in terms of my education and backgrounds and also certain activities that I was involved in still while I was in the United States, in Turkey, and basically the kind of thing that you would consider today is being considered citizen journalism.
Could you be more explicit? What's citizen journalism? I'm not familiar with that concept. If you could explain that concept to me.
Conducting research and write editorial pieces, whether on political situation in Iran, or whether the articles I had written or the meetings I have discussed, the journalism, protection of journalists in Turkey under human rights because of the my involvement with Committee to Protect Journalists, political and civil liberties related issues.
So how many articles or books had you published when you were hired by the FBI?
I had not published any books.
Any articles? Any newspaper articles, op-eds, magazine articles?
It's hard for me to tell how many of the stuff I had written have been picked up by international press, whether in Turkey or elsewhere. I have to check. I don't know.
Let me just give you an example. If I write an article, I will submit it and it may be published by the New York Times or the LA Times or something like that. And I know because I have an arrangement where you submit articles and they tell you it's going to be published or not. Did you have any such arrangement with any publication?
No, I was doing it just mainly for public. The same thing for my activism with the Committee to Protect Journalists, or also working on behalf of sexually abused children in Alexandria with Alexandria Court. I was providing all those services and expertise for free because that was my public work as a volunteer.
And how many hours of volunteer time would you do per week, would you suggest?
Do you have a time period?
The time period when you were working on with your company, I guess it began in '96.
My company was established in 1992, and I had other real estate related businesses. It depends. Between 96 and 99 for Alexandria Court and sexually abused children, I would spend about 15 hours a week working on that case, on researching and writing and reading about political related issues, including journalism, civil liberties. During that period of time, it's hard to estimate. I would say in the range of maybe 10 hours a week.
What was the title of the position that you applied for employment in the FBI?
Language specialist, contract language specialist for Turkey, and another agreement that said contract language specialist for Farsi.
Were the criteria for that job at all involved any knowledge, expertise, and intelligence?
When they advertised and told me about it, no. But upon my hiring,
that's a good enough answer. And
Well,
was
have you
that
completed your answer?
no.
Oh, did you want? If you think I've interrupted you, if you want to explain further, you just tell me.
Sure. The special agent Dennis Sasher for Turkish Counterintelligence and Counterterrorism Division, he also had a say in the matter, and he wanted to evaluate my political understanding and understanding of Turkish criminal operations in general, including the ultranationalist Grey Wolves, before he gave his okay. And we had a session that was during the time when my contract was being approved, and he made recommendations saying yes, he needed my expertise in the area of Grey Wolves, Turkish ultranationalists. So I don't know how much role it played, his opinion, but that was one of the criteria that he wanted to have for his translator.
Was he the one who made the decision?
I am not sure about how the hierarchy works within the FBI. Was it taken into consideration? I don't know. It was sent to the headquarters, and the headquarters people that I'm not sure who they were.
So did you have a separate interview with him in conjunction with your application?
After my application, yes.
And this was before you were hired, as part of the application process?
No, this was during the time that they were drawing my contract. Because of September 11th terrorist attack, they wanted me to start immediately. So as I was working, they were actually completing my contract. My contract work was not even completed because they wanted me to start immediately.
So that when you were at the time you were hired, you were not had not been interviewed by anybody at the FBI. This was just based upon your written application. Is that correct? Because there was such an urgency.
Correct. 3 years before that, it was a polygraph test for background check and the filling applications, but I was never interviewed by anyone in the FBI ever.
And how long did it take after you applied before you were hired by the FBI?
I don't recall, in the range of not weeks, maybe a week or 10 days, but I don't recall exactly how long it took.
And does the FBI have the GS level pay compensation schedule?
As far as I know, they don't have it for contractors, they have it for full-time employees.
Were you a contractor or a full-time employee?
I was a contractor.
So what were the terms of the contract? How much were you paid? What was the length of the contract? What were your obligations? Did you actually show up at the premises, or did you work off premises?
I showed up in the premises, and
Was it at the J. Edgar Hoover building?
it was Washington Field Office, which is only a few blocks from the FBI headquarters.
Okay, so let's go. Let's go through item by item. What was your compensation rate?
I don't recall exactly. It was in the range of $35 to $40 per hour.
So they paid you on an hourly basis.
Correct.
Did they have a minimum or a maximum number of hours you're supposed to work per week?
They asked me to work 40 hours or more because they needed both my expertise in language and also in the active urgent cases the FBI had, but I could not because I had another job and I was also preparing for my master's degree. So I couldn't give them more than 25, 30 hours a week. And they wanted much more, and they kept asking me, and they also gave me the application and asked me to apply for an agent position with the Quantico because they needed my expertise and language skills. And I got official letters, recommendations recommending me to Quantico because of my knowledge, expertise, and the language skills.
Did you actually apply for a full-time position?
No, they
No.
couldn't pay me enough. I couldn't do
Right.
that.
So they offered you $35 to $40 an hour, and was it up to you, or did you have to work a minimum number of hours in order to stay as a contractor?
They told me everything was up to me because they couldn't find someone with my expertise and language skills and the background checks. So anything I could do, even if it was 10 hours I could spare, would be great because they wanted me to work for them full-time or overtime.
And was there a term for the contract?
I believe so. I'm not sure about the date, whether by the end of that year, because I started in 2001, whether it had to be renewed by January 2002, but there was a time period, correct. I don't remember what it was.
Had the time period expired and you were renewed in April of 2002 when you were let go?
That may have been the case. It was 8 years ago. I don't recall.
And during the period when you were with the FBI, about how many hours per week did you in fact work?
It was not exactly the same way every week because based on my school schedule, based on my family life and work, some weeks I was able to work maybe 30 hours. Some weeks I was able to work about 15 hours. If you were to average it, would be in the range of 20, 25 hours a week.
So that would be about half time. Let's assume 40-hour week would be a standard work week for someone who's employed full-time. You were somewhat like a half-time employee in terms of hours.
She was a contract employee.
Well, I'm a little bit confused when you independent contractor may have different rights and legal obligations as an employee who may get pension benefits and all sorts of health insurance. I worked at the Department of Justice for 15 years, and contractors would not be entitled to those benefits like an employee was. Were you identified in your contract as an independent contractor or an employee for purposes of these benefits and other what you would call subsidiary remuneration for working?
Independent contractor.
Do you know how many other independent contractors were working with the FBI about the time you were?
No.
I presume you're talking in her area?
Yeah, in
Language.
in the language, the translation area.
No. I know of several, because there were more than 200, 300 people in that department, combination of full-time and contractors. and my knowledge is limited to the Farsi department and maybe Turkish department because things were changing. Some people would start as contractors and wanted to work full-time. So I can't give you an exact number.
Do you know whether it was customary that other independent contractors worked on an average 20, 25 hours a week? Or was you in the mid-range, or did you not know about other independent contract arrangements? You didn't know. You didn't know about any other kind of arrangement. And tell me exactly what were the workplace arrangements for you to perform your work? Did you go to a fixed office at the FBI? Were you given opportunity to choose where you wanted to listen to tapes? How did that work?
I can't give you details because of the area, but it was combination. As far as my main work that I was asked to do because it was top priority outside counterterrorism, it was only Washington field office. Mm-hmm. And that was where from other field offices they would send information related to Turkish related area and I would translate. But for certain counterterrorism tasks, I had to go to Philadelphia or New Jersey with the special agents. In some cases, I had to interrogate 9/11 detainees that were shackled in rooms who didn't speak English, and they spoke either Turkish or Farsi or other languages. It was a combination of different tasks.
So your tasks included not only listening to tapes, but doing interrogation of detainees?
I can't say tapes or not tapes, but in addition to audio, it was written. Also, it included live interviews, going to various field offices and translate interrogation results.
So let me be clear in my own mind. You would translate an answer, but you wouldn't be the one making up the questions for the detainees, or is that inaccurate?
It depended, because after September 11th, some of the FBI agents, they didn't know anything, and they were very nice and good to know that they didn't know anything. So they would defer to my expertise to ask the right questions from detainees and some of the immigrants they had rounded up. In some cases, there were certain Kurdish individuals, and even the special agent in charge would take me out and would say, what kind of question do you think needs to be asked? And I would tell them this and this. And because of the region this person from Turkey had come, it's not a very religious city, so, or this person seems to be from the area and a family background that is ultra-nationalist, so they would ask me to actually draft the questions to trip the detainees and get the right answers. So yes, in fact, the special agents in charge deferred to me to draft questions because they didn't know where Turkey even was.
Can you give me, and I don't want to intrude on intelligence sources and methods, can you give me an example of a particular question that you drafted for a detainee?
I think that would be beyond the scope.
Okay. Withdraw the question. Now, I think that in your testimony this morning, you stated that the allegations that you had made internally to the FBI about various amounts of wrongdoing had all been substantiated by the Inspector General's report. Is that your recollection and statement, that your allegations were all substantiated by the Inspector General?
No, I said the Inspector General's report is public, and you can defer to it, and I believe I was asked about Dickerson's espionage case, and on that particular case, I said the report substantiates and states that those allegations were supported by other witnesses and documents or some language to that effect.
Now, were there other allegations that you made that the OIG said were not substantiated?
Objection, foundation. We haven't established that the OIG looked at the allegations.
To your knowledge, did the OIG look at allegations, for example, relating to misuse of travel?
Yes.
It did look at those. And do you recall whether the OIG substantiated your allegations on that score?
I don't recall. They It may have been one of those that it was not conclusive or they didn't have other witnesses. I'm not sure. It's been a while since I read the report, but you can bring the report and I can go over that.
Yeah. Would it surprise you if I gave you the report and it said that it was unable to substantiate your travel allegations?
Not at all.
I don't think she knows you well enough to be surprised.
After April, when you were discharged or you weren't renewed by the FBI, what then did you turn to for employment or work, or what then occupied your time?
Time you're referring to?
Well, why don't we? Well, yeah, let's take it year by year, but maybe we can abbreviate it if there's some years that are the same. So, from April in 2002 to the end of 2002, what were you doing after you left the FBI?
I had just begun my case with my court case with my attorney, so most of my time was concentrated on my case, legal case in court, and the necessary research related to my case.
Okay, so you're working on challenging the legality of your discharge, is that correct?
Yes.
And what about 2002 to 2003?
More research and contacting other FBI and CIA and Department of Defense witnesses who could have known about these cases or worked in the relevant areas, and my legal case, and starting my organization around that time, which is a nonprofit organization.
Okay, what's the name of the organization?
National Security Whistleblowers Coalition.
Uh-huh. And is that incorporated as a 501c3 organization, or what's the corporate?
It's 501c4.
C4 organization. Correct. And that was incorporated in 2003?
I believe it was end of 2004.
End of 2004?
Correct.
And what is the mission of that particular organization?
It works with intelligence and law enforcement related individuals who have been wrongly treated or retaliated against for whistleblowing in general, and helping them with their cases, legal cases, referring them to attorneys, analyzing their cases, their court cases, their filings, and also coordinating with the media about any release or statements on their cases, developments, and also legislation activities with Congress.
Who are the officers of that organization?
It's myself.
What's your title?
I am the founder and director. And I have two senior advisors. And one of them is Professor William Weaver, who used to work for NSA, National Security Agency, and now he's a senior professor at University of Texas.
And who's the other senior advisor?
Stephen Elson. He was the top-ranking Federal Aviation, FAA, Red Team member on terrorism-related operations.
So you are the director, and then you have two senior advisors. Is there a board of directors?
Yes, and the board of directors is myself and Stephen Elson and William Weaver.
Any others?
No, not that.
Are there any other officers? A treasurer, secretary, anything like that?
That will be me.
That's all you?
Yes.
And is this a stock or a non-stock corporation? It's a non-stock corporation. How do you receive your revenues, your receipts? How is it funded?
It's based on volunteer work, and all my members, they all work as volunteers for the organization. So I have 100 workers who work without getting paid.
Do you solicit any contributions?
No. Not right now.
Are the revenues zero?
Correct, because I am independently wealthy at this point, and I don't need to owe anything to anyone, so I don't have to raise funds.
What is the street address of this organization, if it has?
It has a P.O. box.
It has a P.O. box.
Correct.
Is it fair to say it operates out of your house, your residence?
And other members' residence, too. And also the coalition organizations. I have several members, partner organizations who have been doing this, so they are also my partners.
And how many volunteers have you had?
It depends with the time period. During congressional legislation activities, sometimes I have 60 who are working with writing articles and working with the media, going to Congress, meeting with various congressional offices. In certain quieter periods, I may have only one, so it just depends.
Mm-hmm. Do you keep a track of how often your organization is quoted in the media, through Google or otherwise?
We have a press section which keeps track of it. Again, certain period when we have high-level congressional activities, which we had a lot in end of 2005, was almost daily, which would be Congressional Quarterly, Federalist, and all these documents. And then there will be a period that will be quiet period, like any other NGO.
Mm-hmm. What about getting articles that the organization has written published in the media? Does that happen?
Yes, I was published by the Journal of Atomic Scientists on nuclear black market and nuclear whistleblowers, and that was published, I believe, in 2006. And I was published together with my partner, Professor William Weaver, I believe his publication on intelligence-related whistleblowers. Correct.
So you began the organization, you think, in 2004. About how many hours per week do you devote to this organization?
It depends. Certain period.
Give a range.
Totally depends. Again, during congressional activities, I may spend 70 hours a week, and during some quiet time, it may end up being 10 hours. It just depends.
Now, other than this organization that you are the director of, have there been any other employment, work-related activities that you've undertaken since you were discharged?
Continuing my company together with my husband as a consulting company for retail.
So
until now.
Does that exhaust the universe of your work activities? You worked as a consultant on the retail and inventory. You were running. You were the director of the whistleblowers 501c4, and does that exhaust your work-related activities?
No, it doesn't, because I spend a lot of time both researching and writing, not only for my websites, but for my blog, and also working with individuals from the intelligence community on issues of interest.
And could you identify those particular issues that have been of interest to you? Let's start out with the most recent year. How about the year 2009? What have been the intelligence activities, national security activities that have been interest to you that you've pursued?
Civil liberties related issues, including the misuse and abuses of state secrets privilege. The recent congressional activities on legislation for whistleblowers, for inclusion of national security whistleblowers who are currently not included in the legislation or the markup. It has been on the general mainstream media trend of not reporting on certain areas and issues, whether it's related to national security whistleblowers or certain geographic regions or certain cases like this, for example. Like this would be something I will be working on in the next few months. Since
you left the FBI, has your area of interest continued with regard to foreign governments corrupting the State Department, Defense Department, and members of Congress to get weapons material, nuclear material, bribery, and that kind of thing? Has that been an area that you've pursued since you left the FBI?
It's not only that I have pursued, it's been because of my background, a lot of sources and people have started contacting me, and I have gotten to see more documents and newspaper articles, etc., on these areas that I didn't have before the time or interest in.
Now, you testified that the government of Turkey has corrupted the U.S. Congress and the State Department, etc. What other countries do you know have also corrupted the United States Congress, State Department, Defense Department, National Security Council through bribes, blackmail, or otherwise.
I think she identified specific individuals, not the entire institution.
No, she identified the government of Turkey. That question was raised, the government of Turkey, and she said the government of Turkey had corrupted the United States Congress, amongst others.
So the question is, what
other countries other than Turkey have corrupted the U.S. government and various its organs based upon, you testified most of it is money, but sometimes it's blackmail. But what other governments have also accomplished that feat?
I object to the breadth of the question. The other questions were based on specific individuals.
No. Answer the question, please.
Based on my information, I had knowledge and have knowledge to particular activities that was done in conjunction together jointly with those entities, the Turkish entities, including the ones connected to Turkish government, that were working and with Israeli lobby groups, and certain people from the diplomatic community of Pakistani embassy that were operating out of Washington, D.C., together with those Turkish entities.
So your testimony is under oath here that the government of Pakistan and the government of Israel worked in conjunction with the government of Turkey to give money and to blackmail congresspeople and people in the government in order to get things favorable from the U.S. in their foreign policy.
I said individual connected to those offices.
Now, let's go back. When you testified earlier, I think to one of Mr. Mannion's questions, you did use the word government of Turkey had corrupted the Congress and the establishment and the executive branch through money and blackmail and otherwise. You used the word government of Turkey. You didn't identify, oh, it was only the prime minister or people in the embassy's office. You used the word government of Turkey. Now I'm asking you, are you also saying that the government of Pakistan, the government of Israel also worked in collaboration with the government of Turkey to corrupt members of Congress and the executive branch establishment through money or blackmail in order to get foreign policy favors?
I object. I believe you're taking her testimony somewhat out of context.
I'm repeating, I know the word government of Turkey was used. I'm not taking it out of
The
context.
word government of Turkey may have been used, but I don't recollect it being used in the exact context you're using it.
Please answer
My
the question.
Individuals connected working with these governments in their official capacity.
Well, you're not answering my question. I'm asking you to use, as you use the word government of Turkey, in the same sense that you understood government of Turkey when you used it in answering Mr. Mannion's question, to apply that same understanding in Pakistan and Israel as to whether or not the government of Pakistan and the government of Israel collaborated with the government of Turkey in corrupting U.S. Congress people and members in the executive branch of the United States government to win favors in the foreign policy and national security arena.
Objection to the form of the question unintelligible. Can you give a simple question, please?
I join the objection. I can't understand the question.
When you testified earlier that the government of Turkey was corrupting the U.S. Congress and the executive branch officials by money, bribes, and blackmail, what by the government of Turkey?
Individuals and certain individuals and operatives with official capacity, and that official capacity being the employees and members of Turkish government.
So you did not mean the government of Turkey in the sense that there was an official government of Turkey policy that involved bribery. You meant that these could have been rogue elements that weren't operating under the aegis of the Prime Minister's office and doing this on their own for their own personal greed or pecuniary benefit.
Are you identifying a specific person or the totality?
Well, I'm just clarification between her understanding of individual members who belong to a government. Take, for example, in the United States, you can have one individual who is subject, who's found guilty of bribery in the executive branch. It doesn't necessarily mean that that individual is operating under the aegis and the sponsorship of the President of the United States and the government. It might be or it might not. He could be rogue or it could be in collaboration with the government itself, the policy of the government. You understand that distinction, Ms. Edmonds? All right. Now I'm trying to take that distinction and applying it to your use of the word, the government of Turkey is bribing and blackmailing members of Congress and the executive branch to doing favors in its foreign policy and national security arena. Were you thinking in the government of Turkey in the sense that these individuals that you're referring to were acting at the behest and the aegis and the sponsorship of the Prime Minister and his government, or were they acting as rogue elements? Which one were you referring to?
I object to the question. For example, I don't think the United States government itself can engage in unlawful conduct. Individuals of the government may be, and the government in itself may be viewed as being engaged in illegal conduct, but a country cannot engage. This country cannot engage in illegal conduct.
Yeah,
so
governments are there, but go ahead.
You have a problem. The perception is when the President of the United States does something illegal, the government has done something illegal, and so I think it's difficult to try to pull them apart. You're asking this individual to speak on behalf of actions taken on behalf of a government or taken on behalf of the representatives of the government, and I believe it's beyond her capacity to give you the specific answers you're looking for.
Can I make an objection?
Of course.
I feel like these questions are very argumentative, they're very convoluted. I mean, I feel like you're just making an argument and asking the witness a question which is unintelligible. And it seems like you're here defending the government of Turkey and not cross-examining you.
No, I'm responding to actually something that's in the complaint rather than something that's totally irrelevant, because one of the charges that Mr. Krikorian makes against Gene Schmidt in his various campaign literature that's subject to the complaint is that the government of Turkey gave money to Gene Schmidt, and the government of Turkey, government-sponsored PACs gave money. And that's the phraseology he uses, government of Turkey, government, not individuals. And that's why I'm trying to get your assessment when you testified to Turkish government what you meant by that.
I'm going to object. I think you're mischaracterizing. Why don't you show the witness the complaint instead of characterizing it? Because I think you're mischaracterizing.
All right,
Show her the complaint. Here's a copy right here.
Yeah. I'll show her the exhibits, which is perhaps more relevant
Show her
here.
your client's complaint, which you just characterized.
This is why don't we do this? You read through, take your time, the complaint and exhibits to the complaint that form the gist of the outstanding petition, and then we can ask you a question.
Is there a specific question, or is just supposed to just read this?
Sure.
Is this the whole...
There are additional exhibits, but those aren't part of the questions. If you want to show her your copy, that's...
Yeah, it doesn't matter. I just think give the witness an opportunity to do it. And then, do you want to go off the record while she reviews the exhibit?
Yeah, that probably makes a lot of sense.
Going off the record, the time on the video screen is 14:15 and 46 seconds.